Hi there, are you Jimmy Arnaud?
I am.
Hi, I represent a local law firm. I'm here to serve you those papers.
From a law firm? Am I getting sued? What am I getting sued for?
Not my concern.
You won't be able to see her. She's just gonna be living with me.
Hey, sweetie.
Fine, just keep going.
Okay. I'm sorry, honey. Do we have to go that fast?
That wasn't fast.
Look, man, I'm sorry we couldn't make it.
I'm actually kind of glad you didn't.
Oh, yeah?
My mother was an extremely charitable woman. She loved Bruce Springsteen. She used to sing Thunder Road to me when I was going to sleep.
Everything go okay?
Everything went normal. It starts out and there's a harmonica.
The court has testimony that you practiced reckless behavior at funerals.
I lost my daughter today! Stay down! Ow! Stay down! Stop! You ripped my back! You hit me? Vance, you ruined my life! I never ruined your life! You I saw that goddamn video! Who danced out of you? In my culture, we do things that work! What?
What happened to the fridge?
I thought it was a burglar. Shithead. I didn't mean to call you that. I'm sorry.
Everything okay?
I'm fine. I've never been better in my life.
See me wrestle an alligator, help the alligator.
Hello, and welcome to today's Saturday Matinee film discussion presented by the Denver Public Library. Today, we're going to be discussing 2003's Russian drama, The Return. A couple of housekeeping things first. Please keep your mics muted during the discussion to avoid any potential interruptions. This discussion is being recorded for future viewing on YouTube, but don't worry for your privacy, only the hosts and panelists' videos are being captured. So also, around that time that the YouTube video is made available, we'll have a list of all of the films, albums, books, etc. All the titles that we talked about today will be sent out to emailed to all our participants, so don't worry about taking notes. Please use the chat to communicate with each other and to ask our panelists questions. We'll have a short question and answer at the end of the discussion. So get your questions into the chat as soon as possible, and we'll address as many of those as we can in the last 15 to 20 minutes. My name is Andrew with the Denver Public Library. My DPL co-host today is Kat. So please message Kat or myself if you're having any technical issues or anything like that. I just want to remind everybody, we strive to create a comfortable and welcoming atmosphere here. So just be kind and respectful to each other, as you always are. Today we didn't have a pre-show, but normally you can tune in up to 30 minutes early and we'll show some related film clips and music clips. So look for that in the future. Our guest today is producer, director, writer, and actor Jim Cummings. Leading today's discussion is our favorite film critic, Walter Chaw. So please join me in providing a warm welcome to Walter Chaw and Jim Cummings.
Hey, good morning, everybody, from 100 degrees in Colorado today. We're going to watch this very chilly Russian film. So brilliant programming from Mr. Cummings today. Very briefly, let's get through the fascinating but maybe a little boring stuff, the history of Russian cinema. And when you bring up Russian film in polite conversation, it's a conversation killer, kind of. Usually what people say is I'm not really seeing anything, maybe Battleship Potemkin back in the 1920s. So what exactly has happened with cinema? Well, it's too bad, because Russian cinema is really, really important to the development of modern cinema. Ideas about montage, ideas about juxtaposition and film rhythm and metrics developed in Russia. They saw their first moving picture in 1896, as so many countries did, with the traveling exhibition of Lumiere's product. And from there, they began making silent movies like so many countries did. Among the great silent movie directors like Podovkin and Dziga Vertov, there was a guy named Sergei Eisenstein, which you may or may not have heard of before. He wrote, in addition to being a director, he was also a great film theorist. He wrote these two books. He wrote this one, Film Form and Film Sense. And together they comprise kind of what you need to know about editing and putting together images and theories about holding shots and putting things together. He said that, there's a different thing between shooting a movie and the directing a movie and cinematography that film captures, but cinematography implies. Cinematography is where metaphor and poetry comes from, the composition of shots, and then the juxtaposition of them in editing. And it's great to have Jim, a filmmaker, on here today to talk about some of those things in the movie that he chose for us, The Return. Something fascinating about Eisenstein, so many fascinating things about him. Of course, he did Battleship Potemkin, and he spent some time in the United States, under the sort of the protection of Upton Sinclair and his wife, and he dreamed of making an epic 6-hour film about Mexico. And so they went down to Mexico and they shot 250,000 feet of film there. But then Stalin, because he was gone for so long, Stalin was like, "Are you defecting? You should come home." And Eisenstein said, "No, it's the Sinclair's fault. They're hedonists. It's the producers." And he actually got one of his Russian producers shot for allowing him to be so extravagant in his excess. But he spent 30 days at the border of Mexico and Texas, Sergei Eisenstein, in the 1930s. And so even as I was doing research for today, I was thinking, the perfect person to play those 30 days there would be Jim Cummings. He's kind of got an Eisensteinian demeanor to him. That would be an amazing film, and I would love to watch that. Russian cinema, of course, as soon as Stalin takes over, and poses a lot of things that you can and can't show. There's a great film by Eisenstein that he made called Alexander Nevsky, which he made upon returning to Russia from his Mexican adventure. And he made it, and it was really popular because it was warning, with traditional Russian stories and traditional Russian garb and music and folktales. He was telling the story of this sort of resistance. It was a metaphor for resisting the Nazi. So it was released, and everybody's really excited about it. And then 3 years later, his country, and then it was put back out into cinemas and became a big hit a second time. So film from Russia was deeply politicized. Film from America is too. We just don't notice because it's our politics. But film from Russia is deeply politicized. And figures like Eisenstein, figures like later that would develop, like Tarkovsky and like our filmmaker today, Zvyagintsev, have come under fire from censors for being too critical, perhaps, of the ruling class, of the government, of not hiding their metaphors enough. There was a brief period of time right after right with Gorbachev and Perestroika, where they're making overtly political movies and overtly sexual movies that they hadn't really done during their previous history. And from that period, there's a movie I highly urge you to see, with this caveat that it's one of those movies that you recommend that you feel bad about recommending because it's so devastating. It's called Come and See, from 1985. It's directed by Ilham Klimov. And there's kind of a very loose connection between that film and the film we're talking about today that we'll get into. It's essentially about a child who witnesses all the ravages of war. It is one of the most devastating war films that I've ever seen. You mark your life with certain films as the period before you saw this movie and the period after. You'll never be the same. So I really recommend it, but with that caveat that you're about to get, your life is about to change if you decide to watch it. A lot of modern directors sort of kind of blip on our radar in the West. Alexander Sakharov did a really interesting thing called the Russian Ark. Timur Bekmambetov kind of made a big splash with his Night Watch movies. So occasionally we get glimpses of Russian film that makes it in the United States that seems commercial here in the United States. And then we get a guy like the guy we're talking about today, Andrey Zvyagintsev. He is singular in my mind among modern Russian filmmakers. His closest analog in Russia is probably Andrei Tarkovsky, who during the 60s and 70s made 7 movies only, but he's an all-time master. He while he was in the Soviet Union, he made movies like Ivan's Childhood, Andrei Rublev, Solaris, Mirror, and Stalker. And then he ran into some trouble with the government about things that he was saying. And so he left, and he made 2 other films, Nostalgia and The Sacrifice was his last film in 1986. He is remarkably patient. He talks about big things, and we're going to be talking about some of those big things today. When we talk about Zvyagintsev, the director of today's film, most often in the West, we compare him to Tarkovsky. I would also compare him to Terrence Malick and Ingmar Bergman as 2 other great titans of patience and the beauty and the sometimes the harshness of nature. as well, and how it speaks to human affairs. But Zvyagintsev, as you saw, if this is the only film that you've seen by him, this is his first film, believe it or not, is classically trained. He knows where he's coming from, and he understands film language in a very specific way. And so when I asked Jim to come on today, I didn't know what he was going to pick. If you're familiar with Jim's work at all, it's singular and indescribable. I've tried to tell people, I recommend Thunder Road to anybody who asks, and they say, what is it? Like, I don't know. It's great. It's what it is. It is remarkable. And then he sort of on the side said, hey, Walter, do you want to watch a werewolf movie? He's like, heck yeah, I want to watch a werewolf movie. And he sent me a link to his movie, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, last year. And it's kind of a werewolf movie. It's more something that's indescribable. So he has been toiling in the trenches. He is a voice of optimism and light whenever you encounter him. He produces other people's films. He cares about this industry more than people that are in the industry. Solid. Every time I've talked to him, I went through kind of a rough patch earlier this year, and one of the few people to reach out to me was Jim. He reached out to me immediately. He said, hey, how you doing? Are you okay? F those guys. That's Jim Cummings. He just, he is what he says. He walks the walk. He talks the talk. I respect him so much, and I love his movies so much. And I said, hey, what do you want to watch today? And he's like, how about The Return by Zvyagintsev? I was like, are you kidding me? Yes. Are you kidding me? Yes. All right. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Jim Cummings.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Walter. I'm embarrassed. That was a very wonderful introduction. So it's crazy is you've met Zvyagintsev, you told me, which is crazy. And you said that you went and heard him talk and that there was like nobody there. And that's kind of how I feel in talking about this movie, where like I was so happy to have been a neighbor of yours on Twitter and film Twitter and being friends through that. But then to say, you said, what movie do you want to watch and like talk about it? And I was like, I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen this movie called The Return? And it's that same feeling of like, how does nobody know about this guy? How does nobody know about this movie? Because it is so impactful and potent and transportive. And I'm just honored to be able to talk to you about it. I'm taking notes. You're so thoughtful and smart. And I'm writing down all this stuff about even how to pronounce the guy's last name. I had to write down.
Well, now I'm embarrassed. But after that thing with Zvyagintsev, we rode on a gondola together. This was like a 15-minute ride. And I spent the whole thing just saying, dude, I so love The Return, and it made me cry. And I talking about this. I went on and on and on. At the end of it, he kind of was like, no English. So I kind of made an ass of myself for 15 minutes. And my friend Katrina was there, and she's like, selfie? He's like, selfie. So I got a selfie out of it. But I was just like jabbering at him in a language he didn't speak for 15 minutes. But that's how I feel about this movie.
Yeah, like, you don't understand. Your movie's incredible. I love it so much. It was so impactful to me. And then he's like, yes, I don't know what you're talking about. See you later. And so
no, I'm pretty sure he was like trying to get out of the gondola. Like he's like, how close are we to the ground? I think I'm getting attacked. But let's start there. Aside from, people not really know about this movie or whatever, why The Return today? Why did you pick this movie?
I picked this movie because it is very important to me. I saw it when I was about 14 years old. I was living in New Orleans. That's where I'm from. And there wasn't much of a film culture in the small town that I was in Matinee. And I would ride my bike to a Blockbuster and basically look at all the spines of the movies and see which ones were Criterion Collection. And then I would like rent all those. And then I watched this one kind of by accident. It comes up on you by accident. You don't realize what the movie's going to be. And the cover looked neat. It just looked like a fun wilderness movie or something. And then I've watched it probably once or twice a year since I was 14, which is insane, where it's like it has this bizarre nostalgia for me for a life that I didn't have. And I think it has this kind of cult following, like you and I guess we've started it maybe, but in the same way that Stalker by Tarkovsky does, of this kind of wilderness pornography meeting these incredible performances and cinematography and sound design and simple music about really touching serious issues about legacy and secrets inside of families and how it's all very stupid. And just by talking about the problems that you have, you can solve many of the things that are going wrong in a family. It just spoke to me so much. And I haven't really talked about it publicly because it's such a secret, kind of private movie when you're watching it. It's an experience. It's not a film. It's this weird, terrible camping trip with an awful dad for most of the movie. And it makes you feel so much. That's why I picked it.
Yeah, there's, you bring up some really big issues, and I want to talk about some of those. But it begins literally with a leap of faith. Right. And one of the boys takes it and the other one doesn't take it. And this idea of spirituality that sort of shoots through it. Now, he's influenced by Hopper. He's influenced by a lot of recognizable painters and everything. He's also influenced by this painting by Andrey Zvyagintsev, who is a 15th century painter.
Wow.
And you see, this is the first, you see the father here when we first see him, and then he's juxtaposed, we're juxtaposing the obvious, the echo from this, I think 1480, I think it was painted. This is Christ immediately from the cross, and there's three spectators. I think it's called The Fallen Christ with three spectators. But it's throughout the course of the film, you're going to find images like this in the movie that are what is it? They're ecstatic, right? In the religious sense, where you are transported. And when he's been interviewed about this, when I've asked him about this movie, he's like, well, what did you think? Because it's not my job to tell you. It's my job to show things, and it's your job to see them. And so it's like, these are the echoes that we're seeing without necessarily knowing that we're seeing. So let's talk a little bit about spirituality and the role of the father, and the idea of fathers and parenting and everything comes through in your work as well. What is it about this movie? The spirituality of it. Let's start there. Where does it get you in terms of spiritual?
So I mean, like, not a religious man, but this guy is definitely Old Testament God of like the meanest, cruelest person. Even from the onset. And so I get that. I can see that. I hadn't seen that painting before. That's unbelievable. That's so cool to see. That's clearly a direct representation and copycatting of that. It's unbelievable. I think really the parenthood of this guy, he's been gone for so long, and then he comes back and then just tries to be this kind of military 50s dad. And it's just so awful with the audience is in the shoes of the younger son, where he's like, well, who do you think you are? You can come in and start bossing around the family. But then you understand the older brother because he hasn't had a father figure. He wants to impress the guy and he wants to be nice to him. And it's this perfect dichotomy of how these warring factions inside of a masculine driven family kind of fight each other. It's so realistic. The perfect storm and spinning plates for this like one act play that the movie becomes, of following these people into the woods, where that the older brother is going to be coerced by the guy until he's not, and then the younger brother is going to be sabotaging the weak. And I don't know, it's so terrifying and nerve-wracking. It feels like you're watching a reality TV show or something, just like, oh my god, this is going to go so badly. And that is such a wonderful engine with which to carry through the film. And I have a great relationship with my father, and I have many nieces and nephews. I have a good relationship with kids, and so because of that, it's a horror movie when you're watching it. When they're paddling the boat and he's not doing anything, and they're it's exhausted from doing this, and you're like, oh my god, this is I guess how some people are raised. Russia is so terrifying sometimes, Anyway, that's my takeaway from the movie, is like it becomes this pseudo horror movie that is just reality. It is just you can make something that is about a family that can also be very, very scary. And that's my big takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's actually Kierkegaardian, this idea of labor and the labor of spirituality and the labor of love and the real work that we put in. I mean, it's kind of triggering for me. My head wasn't quite like that, but it was I recognized it, and I recognized the older brother wanting to please, not only the father, but the group of kids that they hang out with. He wanted to fit in, and this sort of comment on groupthink and the comment on the patriarchy. If you want to start using some modern parlance with addressing this movie, it got Zvyagintsev in some trouble. Not with this film, but in 2014, it made a movie called Leviathan, which not only goes after Putin's government, but goes after the Russian Orthodox Church. And, very similar metaphorical. It's a retelling of the book of Job, essentially. And except, Job sort of is let off the hook, but his characters never really are. And so you see the roots of it here with this. And, if he's mirroring, the Father's return with, Jesus spending 3 days, in the darkness and coming back. And so there is a struggle now with how we take in spirituality. We take in, the sacrifices that our parents perhaps have made without our knowledge, or there's some. I'm not religious either, so I'm just kind of walking in the dark here. But there's something going on when you're using really religious images to talk about, the father-son relationship, which is all that we're ever talking about, really, is our relationship with the Father, and religion is a conversation with the Father. Right. And there's that.
I mean, that's another big takeaway for me of like watching these people struggle with this guy. And when, they're threatening to fight him and like, he's got the knife and stuff. It's kind of like, yeah, this should have started at the beginning. Like this guy, you shouldn't let this guy in your house if he's going to bully you around and be overly controlling of the mother, and then just immediately call the shots of I'm taking the kids away fishing, and he abandons them on a bridge. It's like it's so Old Testament. It's so terrifying. And for Thunder Road, we were inspired by the story of Job as well, if not only just to watch somebody's life just completely fall apart, but we did that as a comedy where it was like, okay, well, let's see if we can also make it funny. But then to have that redemption in the end, I found it very important. That's like the Springsteen in me of having this like wonderful redemption. But with this film, it's so wonderfully crafted. You describe the opening of like him trying to impress the kids and separate himself from his younger brother who's too chicken to jump off of the tower. And it takes the mom coming up and saving him. This kind of like Grace character who comes up and saves the kid. But then to have that perfectly mirrored at the end of the film, where it is this, in most horror movies, the ideal ending for a horror movie is that it is unexpected, but it has to have happened. Like it's something where it's a surprise, but it's inevitable. And that's how this movie ends. But then it continues on, where it's like you see him once he falls, and then you see this kind of like fraternity in these two people who have to take care of each other. And it is the metaphor of, well, we were fine without this guy in the first place. And the point of the family is to find happiness and homeostasis without any of this insanity. That was real. And that's a wonderful question to ask of like, if you were reading it as a book, it was much more literary. It's possible that he didn't. He was dream of these two brothers trying to find their way. It's so weird. Like I never get to talk about movies like this, but this movie requires you to talk about it. Like it's such a beautiful tone poem about this mindset of dealing with difficult people.
Before we get back to the idea, which has always fascinated me about this movie, about whether or not the father is there on the trip is real. Because the pictures at the end of it, he's not in any of the pictures, and the kids are driving it.
That's right.
Is he actually there? Or before we get there, let's talk a little bit about the filmmaking, though. You talked about being left on a bridge and the rain, and how most of the film happens in liminal spaces, like on beaches or on edges or precipices or towers, that they're happening in places of transformation throughout all of it. As a filmmaker, there's so much patience in this movie. And I know Thunder Road only had about 25 shots, you said. So really, really long shots. So talk to me about long shots and the difficulty of it and the rationale behind having long shots in your film.
Yeah. Long takes are impossible to do. If there's anything that's happening that, like in this film, in The Return, it is so impressive what they're able to do. Shooting in nature alone, shooting in the rain, shooting on these enormous towers and having controlled camera moves that last for longer than a minute at times, is incredibly impressive from a cinematic filmmaking side, because I've done that before, and I don't know how they were able to execute the fall off of the tower. Like, there's so many little moments that are captured in single takes where it's like, oh my God, how did they actually do this? But working with child actors and working in the rain and working in boats, like, it is just a nightmare scenario for trying to make something authentic. And every frame of the movie is authentic. The performances are all very, very realistic. You're there with these kids, and that never happens. That is the middle of the Venn diagram of impossible filmmaking is this movie. But long takes, I love using them because I saw Children of Men in theaters 1,000 times. And those two really long takes really spoke to me spiritually as a filmmaker, of being able to transport an audience to an experience in a way that conventional editing doesn't, where you don't feel like you're actually living you're inside of the car with these characters. And so I love that. I love Tarkovsky's cinematography. I love being able to have something that transports an audience to a place and a time and an atmosphere, and kind of disarms them from the preachiness of normal, craftsmanship of editing. Where, if you shot Stalker and it was all cut up and they were talking about deep philosophical stuff, you'd be like, oh, this is just a filmmaker making a weird movie in the woods, jamming some stuff down your throat. But to do it in long takes, it makes you feel like that sort of preachiness washes over the audience. They're just here and listening to these people speak in the woods. And The Return does that very well, where it disarms you to think that everything is going to be fine, and it's all these beautiful landscapes, and the brothers, they're going to work on stuff with the family, so that when real stuff happens, you feel like you are at the diner, and the dad is being incredibly rude, and they're just neighbors in the diner. It's wonderful. It's just a perfect fusion of philosophy of making the movie and also executing it, and that sort of craftsmanship is incredibly rare, even still.
Yeah, I think we have really long takes, and Herzog does this brilliantly with his documentaries, where he has subjects talking and then he just leaves the camera running, and then they keep talking and they shouldn't. I love this idea about feeling trapped, feeling like there's a sense of the inevitable, but you can't leave. You can't turn away. The camera's not turning away. We can't turn away. You're stuck in this, and you're transforming with them. You're growing with them or not. It's really kind of a remarkable tactic, if you will, to create a real suture and cohesion into this. Let's talk a little bit about the father being real. I think you're of the camp that, of course, he is, and I'm of the camp of, like, of course he is, but maybe he's not a father in the sense that we think of a father as physical. Maybe he's, I'm still trying to impress my dad. My dad died 17 years ago. And whenever something happens to me that's great in my life, I wonder how my dad's going to think. My dad is a present in my life, for good and for bad. And he will be until I'm dead. So it makes me wonder, if it's not the father literally returning in the flesh, what is the return of the title? What has returned at the beginning of the film? What is the inciting incident that moves the rest of the picture? Maybe that's too specific a question.
No. I think you've also, I'm going off of your realization that the older version of the father is not in the road trip photographs. It's just him when they're toddlers. And so maybe it is a return to this, like, family unit that they used to have of being happy in a slideshow. That this whole previous 10-year gap was this awful adolescence and brutality, and maybe it does end in more happiness, like they did when they were children. Yeah, I don't know. I always saw The Return as that it's this guy coming back, probably from prison. I think that's another thing they don't really talk about. He's probably a gangster and hid this money, and he was in prison during this long period of time. But I just love that, because he says something about soup, and he's like, oh, he used to have it all the time. And it's like, oh, well, that sounds like prison to me. It's so subtle. But no, I think The Return could also be, it's just about these two young boys being able to come back into their own and find themselves, I think.
Yeah, for me, like, I've gone everywhere with this movie. I feel like the return might be the return of the repressed. This idea of original sin, that at some point during puberty you kind of have a knowledge of good and evil, and that's what begins at the very beginning of it, when he's abandoned on top of the thing, and the mother comes, and it's about this sort of Oedipal split, if you will,
Yeah.
from the mother. I'm in deep water here. I really don't know more than those terms, but it seems to be addressing all of these issues all at once, about how boys become men, and how that's not a good thing, that we romanticize that. And when I watch your films, Jim, the way that you portray men in your movies is extraordinary, because they're not heroes exactly from the way that we understand heroes. They talk about how sad they are, they talk about how scared they are, and how lost they are. They cry. They rail against the universe in inappropriate ways. Sometimes they ask for help. Those are your figures, and the boys in this movie are being taught not to do that.
Yeah, and that's another thing of like every conversation that you have with the dad, and the dad is like reprimanding them and being this drill sergeant a bit. It's all bad advice. It's all like I get this from my friends. I don't need this from you. Like, I'm running around getting in fights and stuff. Like, if I wanted that, like, I'd be hanging out in that weird tunnel warehouse doing the fights with the friends and stuff. And so it's like what these kids need in their life is that kind of love, is what they're getting from the mom already, and every audience member knows that. It's so uncomfortable when you're watching this dad just be a dick for no reason, and it's like, why are you doing this? What's the point of this? And then you realize he went to prison, and it's probably because he had loose parenting or something, and then that he thought that was why he got into trouble, and he's just trying to make sure that his children don't, but it ends up killing him, and it ends up ruining the family. I think that's a really wonderful tale to tell, because often it does. People have these, especially men, have these problems where they feel like they have to put on this facade of toughness to showboat, I guess, for like weird, gravitas reasons, or to try and impress their father, I guess, if he was a tough guy. And instead, it's just they're coming across as complete dickheads. And it's okay to say you don't know what you're doing, or that you're unhappy, or anything, or that you might not be the best father, and asking someone how to be a better father. I mean, there's 1,000 different ways that this whole problem could have been cured. If a therapist came in for 15 minutes, the family would be fine. But because it's all of these Soviet tough guy models, that role models that these people have had, they don't even know that you can do that you can be a softie.
Yeah, I would go even farther. I would say it's not just a culturally specific thing. It's a culturally non-specific thing. I don't think the American patriarchy is much different from the Chinese patriarchy, much different from the Russian patriarchy. We're sort of like indoctrinated with different models, but they're all the same model, right? They just have different faces. It's like, in your movies, you've played cops in your first two, and you really undermine this idea of authority, this idea of this monolithic, Judge Dredd figure. You're the opposite of that, and that's a fascination, because we never see that, really. We see the opposite. We see the whatever. But I think the trap we can fall into when we watch movies from other countries is to say, well, that's them. And honestly, I don't think it is just them. I think that we are all sort of like ruined. You've got a great relationship with your dad, but systemically, we're sort of ruined by this expectation. Even the father in this movie, if he is a bank robber, if he has stolen and ruined his life and come back, and instead of stopping and fishing with his sons, he believes that the most important thing is to retrieve
the money,
whatever it is in the box.
Yeah.
And that for me is extraordinarily poignant now, especially, when I'm quite elderly, and I've spent my life, in corporations and stuff, and feeling like this is success. Don't you understand? I can't do this because this is success, right? I have to work 100 hours a week. I have to do 3 different jobs. This is success. Actually, success is watching my kids grow and taking them camping and being there when they need me, and not telling my son that this is the way to live. So, I mean, I think culturally, monoculturally, we need to have the conversation that you have with your art, Jim, and I think this movie is having with us too, is saying, look, there's something that you're told, and there's something that's true, and we got to figure out which is which.
I love that. Yeah, I remember watching a clip of Bong Joon-ho talking about Parasite, where he says, although people say this is an international movie or a foreign film, we all live in the same country. It's called capitalism. And I thought that was really poignant. Of like, yeah, that there are like it is a Korean film, but it is about this ongoing problem in every country and how terrible it can be. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, originally the script was not written by him. It was written as a heist movie, as a thriller. It was bandits. It was like something that, you know, you got to see what was in the box and everything. So talk to me a little bit about the wisdom of not showing what's in the box. I mean, that's like Repo Man and Seven, right? What's the wisdom there?
It doesn't matter. That's the thing with this movie. It doesn't matter. It's just some, you know, thing that he digs up in a weird hut, and like, and it's I don't know. Also, the cinematography of that, of like moving through and seeing the kids in the background, it's that same thing from Stalker. They basically stole that from Stalker, of the guys walking. It's when he like turns and looks into the camera and they go through the car. But no, it doesn't matter what's in the thing. I'm sure it's valuable. I'm sure it's something that would be, you know, make them a lot of money. But they don't show it because it's like, it's just this stupid thing. It's John Steinbeck's The Pearl. You know, it's like this thing where it's preventing you from being able to have a real family, and that's not what's most important. You could have had a nice trip with your sons.
I love that. I think we don't, especially as men in this culture, we're taught to believe one thing is important when the things that are most important are all around us all the time.
Yeah,
because we don't appreciate that until it's too late. We've talked about Stalker a lot and Tarkovsky. If you remember in Stalker, it's to journey, you know, to take a group of people into a zone that's been infected by some kind of alien presence, we think. If you've seen Annihilation, that's sort of the American remake, loose remake of Stalker. But inside the zone, if you get to the center of it, there's a room, like the room that we see in The Return, and in the room you can make a wish for whatever it is that you want. And the stalker, the guy that they hire to get to the middle to the room, warns the travelers, says the last person that made it to the room got his heart's greatest desire and killed himself the next day.
Yeah.
So there's a little bleed over, carryover. If you're not familiar with Tarkovsky, by the way, you should deeply get into Tarkovsky. That guy's amazing.
And that's a super small moment in the movie. He like says that bit, and it's the whole point of the thing of like, you could go through your whole life trying to get everything you want. Was it Oscar Wilde who said there are two great tragedies in life? One of them is not getting your heart's desire, and the other is getting it. It's so true. I feel that same kind of poignance of watching The Return, of like, yeah, you should be spending time with your kids, and you don't realize it's never too late until it's too late, and then it's too late. There's this bizarre kind of nostalgic tragedy that comes with that, of growing up and realizing what's actually important. And I think, you know, I watched this movie the first time when I was 14, and I'm so glad that I did, because I've lived my life not, you know, caring about the stupid BS that is, you know, digging up money from a spooky house on an island. You know, it's more about having a fun trip with your kids and going fishing and stuff. I think it is this wonderful cautionary tale to kind of wake people up from that problem, and it's done in the most subtle way too. It's not in your face. It's just this experience. And by making movies like this that make you feel so present inside of those experiences, people can have that realization for themselves as if they lived it. If you can make a movie that feels like it is lived in, with each of the characters being incredibly realistic and all the circumstances being incredibly realistic, you can teach someone that lesson. And to do it with children is it's the coolest thing ever. To have it be these young boys who are learning this lesson can really inspire audiences to learn that lesson too.
Yeah, it's really sublime. I feel like I want to talk about this for another hour, but we should ask some questions from our audience. Andrew, do we have a couple?
Yeah, we had a couple of questions. See, James asked, do you guys think that the son Ivan could really have leapt off the tower during the confrontation at the end with his dad? Or do you think he would have regressed like he did at the beginning, kind of?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. My instinct is, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's a threat, and he was. I think, yeah. I mean, with a child of that size, as any parent, you can't take a risk on that. And clearly, the dad didn't. So maybe he would have done it. I don't think that he would have. I thought he was just trying to get away from the guy, but he was also beating up the brother. So I don't know. I don't know. At that point, he's like, what am I doing out here? There's no point in living a life that is this terrifying. It depends on how intense it got. I'm glad that the father fell to break that thing. It's terrible to say, but yeah. I think he eventually had to climb down, right?
I think it's interesting too, because suicide threats and threats of self-harm are, they're, I don't know how we hear them in our society. When I had mine, I was 16. I tried to kill myself and spent 3 days away, in mental institution, and came out of it. My parents refused to talk to me about it. I didn't get therapy. I didn't get anything. It was sort of up to me. But surviving it was like a switch. Threatening it, I kind of got some clarity about where I was important and where I wasn't, and where I was looked after and how they could look after me, and what all the things that I was wondering, I had questions answered. And for me, in a way, like when the father dies in the return, it speaks to me in a way where it says, this is the moment at which the child becomes the father in a way. It no longer needs the father. He becomes the father to himself.
Yep.
It says, now I understand my place, and I have a choice now, a real choice. I can move forward, or I can not. And I made the choice, and he's made a choice too, to come down from the tower. But I think presenting in that way is such a strong, metaphorical, beautiful way. Really is important to have this conversation about mental health and about self-harm.
Yeah.
Especially with young kids, right? Like, you do this to kids, you think you're doing the right thing. I'm going to teach them not to complain all the time. I'm going to teach them how to be respectful to his father. I'm going to teach them what's important. It's not fishing. You want to fish? Stand here, on a bridge of all things, another really wonderful metaphoric spot. All these things are, they might be the right message, but they're taught in a way that's so destructive, you may not even allow your kid to get there,
Yeah, I think that's another thing of like a lot of stuff that I've seen from America about youth and about adolescence. It never talks about, third rail issues like that, or like actually things that affect families. And I think that, in what I was young when I watched this film, and I feel like it helped me because it felt realistic. It didn't feel like the Disney Channel version of this kind of familyhood. And yeah, I think that talking about those issues can actually help people to be free from them. It's a really frightening time being that age. You have no idea what's going on. All it takes is doing something stupid with your friends and getting punched in the eye, and you lose your eye for the rest of your life. You don't realize that, when you're that age, and it happens. And to make movies about the real stuff, the real dangers of this time period is incredibly important, and can sometimes wake people up out of whatever stupid stuff they would have done.
I love how they're calling for him when his body is being pulled away by the tide.
Right. Oh,
Dad, they're calling for him. And I just feel like my dad died when he was 54 years old, and he had spent his whole life working to provide a better life for me and my sister. Really, all we wanted was to go fishing with him. And he died at 54 because of the stress and because of the smoking and all that. But it's like the yearning that I have for a father, that's that moment there. Like when you lose a parent, I think often if you don't have a great relationship with your parent, what you're mourning is the relationship that you wish you had and that you knew that you needed.
Yeah.
Because at that moment you can't have it anymore. There's no chance that.
And it's also, he's calling for his dad, and he had such a struggle calling him that in the beginning of the film, and he's racing out into the water, and it's like, yeah, that's it. It's not, he didn't like that guy when he was alive. Last time he saw him alive, he was trying to beat the hell out of him on a tower. And then as soon as he's going away, yeah, that's exactly that feeling of, the person that you wish that you had, and now they're sinking away, really gone. But yeah, it's a daydream of who you wish this person could have been. And then I think that's who you become, right? That's what growing up is. You kind of realize that, and then you go, okay, well, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be better than the last generation. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to work hard and, go fishing a bit more. Yeah.
Indeed. Okay. Other questions, Andrew?
Okay. Let's see. Steph asked, Would you guys like to talk about the differences in the way that the two boys respond to their situation and to the male approval on offer?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, and the film does a great job of depicting it, but it is about how people work inside of a clique or inside of a tribe, where it is power structures where the dad is the top of the tower, the alpha, and then how the betas end up fighting amongst each other and then trying to fight for approval, or then like social points where it's like the older brother's trying to get points from the dad, but then the younger brother is trying to score his own points by doing the negative numbers thing of like hiding stuff and saying screw you, hacking the system. And it's so true to human psychology of like how young people or men act in groups. I found that he's so earnest and honest that it's disarming a bit of like, oh, you're just watching a documentary about this camping trip.
Yeah, and we should share that the older brother, Vladimir Garin, died in a swimming accident right before the film was released. He dove off a boat to go swimming. He never came up again, and that was like really, I mean, literally like hours before the film premiered. So it's really, there's if you know these things, if you know some of this stuff, you don't need to, but the more that you know about some of the circumstances, the more the grief and the temporariness of our relationships and our lives comes to the fore. And I think the return really is this sort of, wow, it feels like the Wizard of Oz to me in a way. It's occasionally these movies have these immaculate conceptions where you're not really quite sure how they happen. Who's the parent of this movie exactly? And there's so much remarkable stuff in this movie that can't have been planned, could it? Of course you plan the pictures and the images, but most people watching the movie don't know about 15th century Italian Renaissance art, do they? Right. So how is it still so effective? How is it still so effective to say, when Jesus comes back, he's pissed, so we don't actually want him to come back? That's the sequel is not great. So there's something that's happening here in the movie that's sort of subliminal almost, and familiar to that. To your point, Jim, it's nostalgia for a thing that we've not experienced, but we've all experienced. But we've all experienced too, and I think that's part and parcel of the power of the movie. And to go off of Steph's question, and Steph, by the way, is a dear friend of mine and one of my favorite people on the planet. But I love the question because I think what Zvyagintsev does so elegantly is he shows how men respond to stuff. You kind of go along or you fight, and there doesn't seem to be like a good middle ground. And the father, for his part, demands just one way. It talks about rigidity and the danger of not being emotionally available to your kids or to even any kind of debate. What would it be like to be married to this guy? What would it be like to be like in business with this guy? I mean, I'm sure all of his other buddies are dead because of him, or in jail too. If he's there's a rigidity to the way that he's lived his life. And at the end of it, if he does mean well, if he says, look, boys, you don't get it, I got all this stuff for you, ultimately, do the ends justify these means? And it's not just about this one story, right? It's about all of our stories. We hustle our whole lives because we think it's the right thing to do, but is it the right thing to do?
And then it doesn't matter. It ends up at the bottom of the ocean anyway. It doesn't really matter. So it's like, well, what was the point of that? Why was even if you could have that argument of, it was all for you, I was working so hard for you. It's like, well, until it's cut short, and then it doesn't matter. This is the time we have, Yeah. I think another thing that's interesting, you brought up the older brother dying from drowning, which is so crazy and awful. But the same thing kind of happened with Stalker, right? Weren't they were shooting downriver from Chernobyl or something, and members of the cast and crew all died from wasting disease from shooting that movie, which is insane. Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's so much sadness in the world, isn't there?
Yeah. All right. Wonderful Saturday morning cartoons. So next time we're going to do Daffy Duck or something.
We're going to go do Rock and Roll High School again. That's the only way to up the mood in the room. All right. Other questions? I think we have time for one or two more.
Okay. Let's say Kate was wondering if you could talk about the boy's diary and the camera in the film. Like, what role did they play?
Oh yeah. I mean, so I think of that, like the diary, as being this bit of I forget the name of it psychologically, but there's a term for the type of memory that you have where it's like the present memory of being in a hot piazza in Italy and hating life because you're going crazy, and then 2 years later looking back on that time period and going, oh, I loved Italy, oh, it was so wonderful, when really you were just miserable this whole time. We have, the brain works in a funny way. So like if you're writing a journal, that's kind of like what it did for me in watching the film, of like, oh, it's about, the selective memory. And also breaking the film up into chapters of days is also helpful. That's just a neat narrative thing to do. And then the photography just comes back to their glorifying of the photographs that they have of the father when they were kids, and then trying to create new memories with that, to try and return their happiness of like what a good family should look like in photographs. That's how it worked for me, at least.
Yeah, and I think there's something in this movie too that we can begin to examine about the way that we tell stories and the way that we memorialize and the way that we versus the way that we remember. Because if you remember, the photo album is wrapped in newspaper, so newspaper obviously is one way to memorialize the past. Photos are one way to memorialize the past. A journal and journaling, a way to memorialize the past. And famously, Tarkovsky kept a journal for his whole life. I think his last entry was, "I'm so tired. I'm tired all the time now." Maybe that's the problem. But yeah, there's different ways of memorializing things. And of course, we can become meta-textual about this film now too, and say, well, Zvyagintsev is memorializing an event too. And at the end of it, he challenges our memories of what we've seen even in that very moment. It's like, you saw what you think you saw, but did you actually see the father there? Or did you just see the influence of an absent father on the behavior of these two children who were going out to sort of recapture something in the wilderness in Eden? But Eden's a lie. It never really was there, right? And so, this idea about nostalgia for something that we've lost, the Welsh have a term, iau wraith, that we talked about. You're nostalgic for something that you never could have experienced. But that's our expulsion from Eden. That's this idea that Eden was ever, it was something that was up to us to lose. It wasn't a predestined loss of innocence, I guess. Again, this water is way too deep for me. But when we talk about the ways that they're memorializing things, and to your point too about how memory is very unreliable. Here's Zvyagintsev at the very end is sort of like, even what you saw is unreliable, and he's challenging us, I think, to look at it in a different way. Here's a quote from him. He says that art is not some sort of guideline for understanding. It's a thing unto itself. The most important thing for me is the image, not the thought. And so, when we're making sense of the world through the Marvel Cinematic Universe or whatever, where everything is a puzzle box and everybody is related to somebody else, and Rey's dad is the Emperor Palpatine, gross, and everything has to have something like that, right? Here's a movie that challenges that says, even what you saw isn't what you saw. What did you feel? What did you feel? What did it remind you of? It demands an active viewership, right? And we were talking a little bit before we came on, Jim, about those long takes and trust. As we close out today, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about trusting your cast and trusting your material and trusting the audience.
Yeah. So capturing authentic performances is incredibly difficult in filmmaking. I can't tell you how hard it is. And there are times when you'll show up on set with the best script and it's all working in your head, and then it doesn't sound right coming out of human vocal cords that aren't your own. And so you have to pivot and change and make it realistic on the day sometimes. So to have every shot be realistic and beautifully performed and get real tears from these kids, that is incredibly rare. And to have that process of casting and taking that as seriously as you would cinematography or sound design or anything, it's so important to make sure that these characters that you are showing in your movie are the connection that the audience feels to your movie. They've got to be damn good. They've got to be unbelievable. And every member of the cast is in this one. And the camera work moving around these people so fluidly captures them in a way that is just, it's so jealousy inspiring in me. And to know that this was his first movie just really boils my blood. But I just can't tell you how rare it is and how beautiful it is to be able to capture these people in long takes. Sometimes the last time that they're in movies, it's a very rare and fragile thing. And to have it be executed as perfectly as it is just, it's unbelievable. Yeah, that's how I feel about that.
So yeah, I've described this movie to others as sacred, and I think I'm occasionally given to hyperbole, but I really mean it with this one. There's something very precious to me about this movie, and so I'm so grateful that you picked that today for us to chat about. Guys, Jim has a new movie out. It's called The Beta Test. It's not out, but he's finished a new movie. It's playing at the Berlin, the Berlinale, the Berlin Film Festival. It's a big deal. And you know what? As soon as tickets went on sale, it sold out in 40 minutes. That's right. Jim Cummings, a guy who is scrapped, who made short films, who fostered other people to make short films, who kickstarted a little bit of a budget, who made Thunder Road and got everybody's attention. Please watch Thunder Road if you've not seen it. It's amazing. Jim, it's just amazing. It's great. Wolf of Snow Hollow, also great. Great Robert Forster, one of his last performances. Yeah. And now The Beta Test. What a pleasure. I can't believe that you chose this movie. You've filled my heart, Jim. Thank you so much for being
Likewise,
here today.
Man. Likewise. Your love and appreciation of cinema is unsurpassed, man. It is unbounded, and it wakes me up every time to new things about movies. And you are in the same religion that I am in, that is cinema. And thank you for being my cohort.
Yeah, man. Let's go ring some doorbells. Okay. We're leaving you today with a 1978 performance of Bruce Springsteen singing Thunder Road, a song that ironically you never really get to hear in Thunder Road, although it's in our hearts. Jim, thank you again, and be safe out there, everybody.
We were out in the desert over the summertime, driving to Nevada, and we came upon this house on the side of the road this Indian had built. Had a big picture of Geronimo out front with a landlord, said landlord over top. Had a big sign that said, "This is a land of peace, love, justice, and no mercy." And they pointed down this little dirt road that said Thunder Road. This is for Maddie.
Mary's dressed ways. Like a vision, she dances across the porch as the radio plays. Roy Orbison singing for the woman. Hey, that's me, and I want you only. Don't turn me home again. I just can't face myself alone again. Don't you rock